Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck. Today I have a very special guest with me, and that's attorney Emmett McGroarty, and I do hope I pronounced that correctly, and he's from Washington, D.C., where he's a senior fellow of the American Principles Project, which is a prestigious conservative organization that defends the sovereign and security of our nation, that defends political liberty and economic freedom, that defends unborn human life, and is a very, very strong advocate for the preservation of traditional marriage. Now, a very important focus of the American Principles Project is something called the Preserve Innocence Initiative, of which Emmett serves as the executive director. And that initiative is centered on protecting the natural rights of parents and promoting governmental policies that protect the innocence of children. Now, with that, of course, comes a very, very strong interest in educational issues, and Emmett has become a national voice on some of these issues. In addition to guest appearances on national television networks ranging from everything from MSNBC to Fox News, he's also been a very prolific writer, and his writings have been seen nationwide, maybe even worldwide by now. He published a groundbreaking report on the federal takeover of education, which appeared in Town Hall magazine. He wrote on the tracking of private child and family information for the New York Post. And he wrote on the infliction of radical values curricula on children for public discourse. In fact, his writings have appeared in newspapers throughout the country, even in such major newspapers as the Washington Times and USA Today. Now, Emmett earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy from Georgetown University and his law degree from Fordham School of Law. Now, recently, we did a Tell It Like It Is show on the Common Core educational standards now being pushed into the states by the federal government. New Hampshire is one of the states that has signed on to it, and its implementation actually is now being planned for grades 3 through 12 here in the Bedford schools. The name of that show is Common Core, coming soon to Bedford schools. If you haven't yet seen it on BCTV, please do watch it, and you can do that by going to the show website at www.tellitlikeitisnh.com. On the menu bar, you'll see issues. Click on that, and what will come down is something saying most recent shows, and if you click on that, you will be able to watch that show. I strongly suggest you do so, first of all, to get an overall look at Common Core, and secondly, to hear about it here in Bedford. Now, Common Core is not without a lot of controversy. In fact, 5 states have absolutely refused to implement it. Alaska, Minnesota, Nebraska, Texas, and Virginia. And Indiana recently canceled its implementation. Right now, as we are sitting here, several states are either postponing it or considering postponing its implementation, or are raising very, very serious questions about its worth. In fact, just to kind of show you, right now there are rapidly growing what could be called uproars in Utah, Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, Kansas, Iowa, Louisiana, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and South Dakota. Yet, here in New Hampshire, we're not hearing a whole heck of a lot about it. The Common Core educational standards as the new educational mantra for the entire nation is one of those issues for which there was really very, very little public awareness initially, but now it has become the subject of vigorous public debate, as it should, since some of the concerns are very, very serious. Now, don't kid yourself that this issue isn't huge, because it is. And thus, I'm delighted that today we're able to have somebody here who can talk about it from a national perspective and who has become recognized as a national expert on Common Core. So with that, Emmett, thank you so much for coming up from Washington. I understand you've been on a whirlwind all day here in New Hampshire, and I'm so delighted you fit in the time to see us.
Kathy, it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be in New Hampshire, and it's an honor to be on Tell It Like It Is.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Has our fame reached Washington yet?
It has.
Oh, gosh. Only
It
because
has.
somebody here must have told you about it, right? Well, you know, every few years we keep seeing all these new educational initiatives. And I mean, over and over again, we keep hearing that each new one is going to be the new panacea to all of the failures of public education. Can we kind of take a look back, maybe, at some of them and analyze how effective they've been?
Yes, Kathy. Well, you know what you have, I think, in the education world is you have people who are disconnected from parents and citizens, and they sit back and you know, they have an interest in making education better, and they come up with these ideas, but the problem is they're fads, they're ideas that aren't evidence-based, they're ideas that really haven't been run by the ultimate earthly judge, the American people, the parents of these children. So we've seen these fads before, outcome-based education, school to work. We've seen them before, and they've all collapsed on their own weight. Then we had a huge effort to centralize education decision-making with No Child Left Behind. And I think most people can agree that was an unmitigated disaster. Well, now the Common Core Race to the Top program takes No Child Left Behind about 2 steps further, maybe 2 leaps further. And I think it's more dangerous than these other fads, because the Common Core comes along with it a whole structure, a governance structure. And that's something that the people need to find out about. The people need to get engaged in this. At the heart of it, what this concerns is the issue of citizen-directed government. Are we going to have government directed by citizens, or are we going to have government directing and managing citizens? And as we discuss this Common Core effort, I think you'll see, and I think your viewers will see, that it's a much deeper issue than some of these past fads.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but as a non-educator who's recently been following this issue, and I know that you and local people like Anne-Marie Bancroft have been following it for a long time. I'm kind of new to it. But it kind of seems to me that, if you'll forgive the pun, the core, so to speak, of Common Core seems to be the theory that standardizing education across the 50 states in our country will result in all of our kids being better equipped for the future, being better able to compete on the world stage, if you will. Yet, critics seem to be poking an awful lot of holes in these premises on how good these standards are. I've even heard people saying that in essence it's dumbing down standards. What do you say to that?
I think I think that's true. The Common Core is mediocre at best. It is an inferior set of standards.
Wow.
It's an inferior set of standards. This is a monopoly that has been brought about by private interests, and
the private interests are whom?
Well, the private interests are some funders of the idea that we should have a national education system, and there's been this view for a long time: why don't we have this national system? Everyone can partake in it, and then education can be better managed, and we can get better results. That's the theory. The problem with that is that the real drivers of education are parents and citizens, citizen involvement. And the more you cut parents and citizens out of the process, the worse the results are. And the Common Core cut citizens out of the process from the beginning. So neither the citizens nor their elected legislators nor the states had any kind of meaningful role in developing the standards, in making sure that they were of high quality.
Now that's one of the reasons why there's so much uproar in a lot of states right now, right? That legislators are hearing about it for the first time?
Yes, yes. And perhaps we should step back a few years and look at how this happened. So about 20 years ago was the last time we had a real serious effort to have national standards. About 20 years ago, there was an attempt to have national history standards. And Lynn Cheney and American Enterprise Institute, among others, raised the red flag and said, well, these history standards really don't reflect the American experiment. And that attempt fell apart.
Now, why didn't they reflect?
There were some serious content problems. I mean, they didn't embody the gist of the American experiment, that our rights come from God. They come from God directly to individuals, and individuals cede or loan a bit of their power or sovereignty to government for the purposes of protecting our rights. Mm-hmm. There was a national uproar on this, on these standards. The Senate voted, I believe it was 99-1, to reject these national history standards. But the proponents of national standards kept the dream alive. They kept it alive among think tanks, among certain think tanks. And they learned their lesson. And that lesson was, if you want a national education system, you had better not take it to the people or their elected representatives. You had better find a way of getting it implemented that evades this kind of public scrutiny. And so what they did is they recruited some big funders onto the project, most notably the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Around 2006, 2007, started investing in this project very heavily.
Any idea what they've spent?
Well, from about 2006 to 2008, I believe it was about $35 million in developing the plan. Since then, the Washington Post and Heartland Institute they've both estimated that they've spent in excess of $150 million.
That's just Gates.
And that's just Gates.
Wow.
And a lot of this is in laying the groundwork for pushing the standards out into the states. And they came up with this plan, and they recruited 2 associations to the effort. Those associations were the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers.
Now, both of these are flat-out political organizations, are they not?
These
I mean, they're not professional organizations as such.
They're associations, so they're privately incorporated.
Okay.
And I think the important thing is that they are not creatures of state government. Mm-hmm. But this is the big reason why the Common Core proponents say that the Common Core is a state-led initiative.
Ah.
But if you look at it, pull back the curtain, you see that it's not. These associations, there's no grant of legislative authority from the states. They take dues money from the states for the individual participation of their governors. who are acting not in their official capacity. But then they also take money from private organizations like Gates.
Wow.
And the National Governors Association, for instance, is also a federal government contractor.
They are.
So up through 2008, you had, yeah, so it's in the National Governors Association, it's not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests or other sunshine laws.
Is that right? So they basically can do whatever they want with no public oversight.
Yes, right, exactly. It's a private entity. And the idea that their involvement makes this state-led is ludicrous. Plus, you have them taking money from the states, but what's directing their policy and what directed it in this case, I submit to you, was the private money. And so through 2008, I don't think there's any evidence that they had ever taken a vote on the Common Core project. But they did develop a plan called Benchmarking for Success, which was issued in December 2008. And this was a plan for implementing the Common Core system, as many of us call it, implementing it in the states, that is, getting the states to adopt it. And that is, it's a fascinating plan. It's a brilliant document in that it shows how to get something implemented statewide, but never have a debate about it in Congress or in any state legislature.
That's surreal.
And it is, and I think it's dangerous from the standpoint of the American experiment. I mean, this is essentially a blueprint for changing and driving policy without the consent of the people, without going through their elected legislators, without the people knowing what's happening. So we've...
yeah, I mean, it almost seems like this whole issue of Common Core snuck up on people.
And it did. I think by design. You know, I've talked to a number of state legislators across the country. Here in New Hampshire, you have one of the premier activists on this issue, Anne-Marie Banfield. And you know, there's other parents and moms across the country, and collectively we can point to very, very few state legislators who had any idea about this program, who knew, even if they had heard of it, didn't know what it really entailed. Here's a case in point. Senator Scott Schneider of Indiana sat on the Education Committee when this came down. And two moms last year, about a year and a half ago, came to him with this Common Core issue. He hadn't heard about it.
Wow.
And that was
by... he was on the Education Committee.
He was on the Education Committee. That's through no fault of his own, any more than it's through no fault of yours that you haven't heard of this. This is by design. And this is why I think it's very important for all citizens to find out about this program, to understand how it got implemented, and to guard against this ever happening again, this type of radical policy change.
Well, I mean, it seems surreptitious, for lack of a better word.
Well, look, I think so. I mean, you look at what happened. The U.S. Department of Education got embedded in the 2009 stimulus bill, about $5 billion. And they had a lot of discretionary, they had a lot of latitude as to how to spend that money. But they were asked right away in February 2009, Secretary Duncan was asked, well, how are you going to spend this money? And he said, well, I really like the work that Achieve Inc. and Gates is doing on national standards, and I want to be the catalyst who makes that happen. And so what they did is they said to the states, we're going to have a competition. It's a competition, and the winners of the competition will be able to get back some of that money that their taxpayers handed over, paid to the federal government. And here's the competition. The competition is going to be, we're going to see who's most committed to our education policy reforms. And if you can demonstrate to us that you're most committed to these, and you're more committed to these than the other states, and in fact you're already down the road of implementing these, then we're going to give you hundreds of millions of dollars.
And these would be the Race to the Top funds?
This is the Race to the Top funds.
Okay. But
that wasn't all either. I mean, so if I could, I'd like to walk you through the timeline a bit. So 2009, this Race to the Top program is announced. We're going to move forward on this Race to the Top program. And it's at that point that the National Governors Association took a vote on supporting a Common Core program. But even that doesn't really pass the muster in terms of notice to citizens or state action, or make this a state-led initiative. There was a vote. We don't know the wording of the vote. We don't know who was present at the vote, and we don't know who voted against it. We don't know if there was any debate, and that's about the extent of it. But nonetheless, so this program is announced. That's in early 2009. The application for the program comes out in later on in the year. The first applications, it was done in two phases. The first applications were phase 1 applications, were due from the states in January, I believe it was January 19th, 2009. And in those applications, the states had to commit to the Common Core program. That is standards, assessments or standardized tests, which were paid for, the development of which was paid for by the federal government, and which were to be aligned to the standards, and teacher evaluations tied in large part to how students did on those standardized tests. So a state had to commit to that. The phase 1 applicants had to commit to those in those applications they submitted on January 19th, 2010. In March 2010, the first draft of the standards was released. Back it up. Those states that submitted phase 1, they'd already committed to it.
Without even knowing what the standards would be? Without
that, yes, without knowing what the standards would be. So you had to commit to it before you knew what was in it. On June 1st, 2010, the second round of Race to the Top applications was due. And there again, in those applications, the states had to commit to the Common Core system, the standards, the assessments aligned, the standardized tests aligned to those standards, and teacher evaluations, and data collection too. That was June 1st, 2010. The next day, June 2nd, 2010, that's when the final draft of the standards was released.
Nobody howled about this?
Very few people, I think, very few people. I'd give a shout out to Anne-Marie Banfield and Cornerstone Action, but very few people. The idea is that people and their elected representatives would not know what was going on. And then so then the states had 2 months in which to formally fulfill their commitments by adopting the standards. So in that 2-month period of time, this is what basically had to happen. And this was largely done by state boards of education. They had to sit down, they had to look at the Common Core, they had to decide, well, is this something we want? What else should they do? Well, probably look at their old standards and say, well, which one is better? And then what else? Oh, they should probably look and see, well, what evidence are these Common Core standards based on? And now this is something that all sides agreed, including the proponents especially, were saying, well, this is going to transform the education of every child in America. So what else should be done? Well, I would think that you would go and give true notice to your state legislators.
One would think.
Give a full briefing to them of what's all entailed in this program and what evidence is it based on. And then I'm sure those legislators would want to go and have town hall meetings and show to their people and get solicit their input. I would think most legislators would want that. All of that couldn't possibly happen in that 2-month period from June 2nd to August 2nd.
Of course not.
So and then on top of it, you have to sit back and think, well, what was the purpose of this race to the top? The purpose of the race to the top is states are being told you face economic and fiscal disaster because of the state of the economy. And what's going to save you? Well, the stimulus bill will save you. And then they were saying, well, look, the administration was saying this stimulus bill is going to prevent the layoff of hundreds of thousands of teachers. And they were also suggesting, they're also saying, well, when No Child Left Behind gets reauthorized, what we want to do is we want to make a requirement that the money that the federal government transfers to the states to help educate needy children and in poor areas, we're going to condition that money on whether or not the states have adopted our policy reforms. So this was on top of it. I think it was
it's kind of like holding an anvil over the state's head.
It was, yes. It's turning what was meant as a lifeline into a weapon. So this is what happened, and you had governors and state boards. If they were thinking about this at all, they were thinking, well, I don't want to say no to money. And I don't know, we don't have time to really evaluate these standards. We better just accept them and say we're going to implement it and deal with the fallout later. But it gets even worse than that, too. One of the things that happened was when this program was announced, there was a big effort to get the governors and school boards and state education chiefs on board, and to get them on board by getting them to sign on to the promise of the Common Core. So the Common Core was being billed as something that is going to be evidence-driven, internationally benchmarked, rigorous,
but that has not
higher
been the case.
standards. And what was developed failed to meet that promise. So then that kind of brings you to where we are now. Now we have a whole set of politicians who kind of have egg on their face, or they painted themselves into a corner. They've been supporting these standards all along. Some of them, the school chiefs and some of the governors, but they failed to meet the promise. So that's part of what's going on now.
And it almost seems as though, well, not almost seems as though, I mean, it does appear that there's an extraordinary concentrated effort to basically remove all local control of education. I mean, we keep hearing this bada bing story that states can change up to, I think it's up to 15% of the Common Core standards. But in reality, it almost seems as though if a state makes too many changes, they're going to be punished.
Well, actually, a state can't change any of the Common Core. Yeah, they have to implement
15%?
They have to implement it 100%. What they can do is add up to 15% content to the Common Core.
They can only add.
They can only add. And
that's pretty different than saying, then they can change.
And
I think people believe that that 15% means they can change. In
Yeah.
fact, I believe that that was even said at our own local school board meeting recently.
Yeah, and it's a slight distinction in terms of words, but it's a
Yeah.
huge distinction in terms of
Actuality and
actual-
what can happen, yeah.
And then when you consider the standardized tests, which
Yeah.
are meant to evaluate how students are learning, well, those standardized tests are meant to be nationwide tests. So they won't reflect that extra 15% that New Hampshire adds. So if you're a teacher and you're getting evaluated based on how students do on this test, which is new and novel,
And they will be evaluated on it,
they
won't
will be evaluated.
Yeah.
That's part of the Common Core system. If you're a teacher, you have much less incentive to teach that 15%.
It would seem so.
So, I mean, so this is what, but this gets back to that fundamental issue, though. I mean, do we want to keep centralizing education decision making, or government decision making in general, or do we want the people to have a say in it? I mean, this I think was one of the fundamental problems with No Child Left Behind. When you get right down to it, you look at No Child Left Behind, and what we heard over and over and over again was, well, we need accountability. We need accountability.
Right.
We need. I'm for accountability, but that phrase, that question was never fully stated. The issue is, we need accountability to whom?
Excellent point.
Wherever accountability goes to, those are the people who are going to be in charge. And so if accountability is going to the federal government's going to be in charge. And who's not going to be in charge? The parents and the citizens. So that was the fundamental problem with No Child Left Behind. And I think this system takes it,
10 more steps.
several
Kinda sounds
steps
like,
further. Yeah.
One of the things that I keep reading about, hear people talking about, is the huge amount of data that Common Core calls for being collected on kids, basically from kindergarten all the way through their high school graduation. And I understand there's like 400 or over 400 different data points. And all of this could very well follow a person throughout their whole life, to my way of thinking, particularly after what we're seeing of late, of just how much government does seem to know about us already, never mind with all of this thrown in.
Well,
Should people be fighting this? I mean, doesn't it seem as though we should be saying there's something very, very wrong with this?
People should be fighting it, and this is another reason people need to find out about the Common Core system and get involved and fight it. The positive thing on what's going on in America now is that there is a huge mom-led uprising. All those states you were talking about where there's movements underway, these are mom-led movements.
Is that right?
They started by 1 or 2 moms here and there. In Indiana, 2 moms. Utah, 3 moms. Missouri, 3 moms. In state
and what,
after
because
state,
they saw their kids being more or less treated like pawns?
they,
Is
in
that
most
what got them riled up?
instances, in most instances, they became alarmed with when they saw the schoolwork their children were bringing home, the fuzzy math, and for instance, and then they started looking into the issue. And the more you look into the Common Core issue, it really is like peeling back the layers of an onion. You know, you think you know it all, and then another layer is peeled back. And people are upset about this, and they're demanding that their elected officials lead their state out of the Common Core, not just co-sponsor legislation or add their name to legislation. People are rightly demanding leadership. But this privacy issue, it is something that is bringing a drastic change to America. And
it seems kind of startling, the information that they're trying to put together on kids and on their families as well.
yeah, and I would urge people to step back and look at what's intended, and you know, I think it's always good to, as much as possible, try to understand the good that was intended by some people, by people behind a certain initiative. So the idea with data collection is that, well, if we collect data on a child and we track how that child does through the course of his academic career and into the workforce, and we keep tracking that child, well, then we can do studies. And we can do studies about what factors lead to a good student and what factors lead to a good worker, and what factors interfere with the education and workforce. That's one idea behind it. And the other is quite simply, the more you centralize something, the less firsthand knowledge is engaged in, less firsthand knowledge is available for decision making. So you have to collect data. So but the two kind of go hand in hand.
But as I understand it, though, there's almost no limitation as to how this data can be used or who it's disseminated to.
Well, that's true.
I mean, this isn't just for governmental use, correct? This can go out to vendors, this can go out to software developers. I mean, where does it stop? Can it go out to health insurers? Can it go out to employers someday? I mean, isn't it almost limitless where this information could wind up?
Well, the idea is that the information will be used for evaluation and research. But
is there a guarantee to that?
Well, no. The law, the basic privacy law in the United States, the federal privacy law, Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act, is a law that was passed in 1974. And there's been a few modifications to it, but it's basically been in place since 1974.
But haven't some of those
be,
things been waived for Common Core?
The answer is yes. But that law needed to be updated anyway.
Okay.
To reflect the realities of the capabilities of modern computers and data collection.
Okay.
So it needed to be updated anyway. And then what the administration did about 16 months ago is it promulgated new regulations to implement those laws, that law. And those new regulations basically turned FERPA, the privacy law, on its head. So it went from privacy protection statute and to now it's a data sharing statute. So what it allowed governments to do is to share data from a Department of Education to other departments within the state or among states or with the federal government.
And by promulgating new procedures, they once again succeed in removing it from the legislative process.
It was
correct?
then, yes, it wasn't it wasn't run by the people and their elected representatives. And you're right. This data can be turned over to private entities, private research entities, or private entities engaged in research.
See, I find that scary.
It is, and And you know, we need a national conversation. We need federal legislation, and each state should be promulgating privacy legislation to protect its students and workers and families.
Now, what would that do? Now, say, for instance, I mean, we can see clearly, and quite honestly, when I had heard that 15% that the state could change things, and it turns out that's not really true. They can only add 15% of things different to Common Core, which is markedly different. Wouldn't, if, I hope I can phrase this right, by changing, say for instance, in our town or in our state, we said we don't like all this, and we want to put in privacy provisions that aren't part of Common Core now. Doesn't that kind of throw us out of the Common Core rules, regulations, standards, whatever you want to call them? Couldn't there be payback for that?
Well, I mean, privacy legislation, you could twin that with state legislation to pull out of the Common Core system, but the privacy legislation could also stand on its own. In other words, these
Common
regulations
Core couldn't prohibit that?
No, I mean what you're going to have. No, they wouldn't be able to. Here's what has to happen with both the Common Core and the privacy legislation. The states and their citizens have to reclaim their state autonomy.
And by what means? By getting our state legislators to pass?
By the most
laws?
effective means is to pass legislation.
Okay.
With respect to both standards and the privacy legislation.
Okay.
The state needs to start putting limits on what the federal government can do in New Hampshire.
Okay.
And what the federal government can do with data collected on
Now, say
New
that was
Hampshire
not
students.
successful, and say in our town, all right, and by our town I'm using that generically, in our town, the town that I live in or the town you live in, we're unhappy that the state has not taken a leadership role in that, excuse me, but yet local parents are very, very concerned about this data collection on their kids. Can a local school board say, or create a rule that a parent has to sign off on this, for example, and make it stick? Or are local people just kind of flailing in the wind on all this, and just getting everything jammed down their throats?
That's a matter, I don't know the answer to that. That's a matter of the issue there is how much authority has the state allowed the local school board to have.
So that could vary state to state even.
That could vary, yeah, state to state. But I mean, I think that the thing is look, you're talking about private data.
Right.
It could be very personal data.
Yeah. I mean, from what I understand, they're going to be capturing all kinds of information about the families of the kids, not just the kid himself or herself.
Yeah, yeah. We need to address that. That is, there's something called the National Education Data Model. It's on the U.S. Department of Education website, and that's where those 400 data points are. And that's the model that the federal government is suggesting be collected. Those data points be collected on each student. It's the states have obligated, the states that took stimulus money to build out these databases, which is nearly every state. Those states have obligated themselves to protect, to collecting a certain amount of data. But what is actually collected, of those 400 data points, how much is actually collected varies from state to state. And I think that would be a great citizen project to find out how much data New Hampshire is collecting, number one. Number two, who is that, or what is that information shared with? What other entities is it shared with? Is it shared with private entities? Is it shared with the federal government? Is it shared with other states? That is of vital importance. And on the protection side of it, you know, the citizens of New Hampshire need to decide and sit down and decide, okay, what data does the government, you know, what data should New Hampshire be empowered to collect? Should parents be able to access the records kept on their children? Should parents be able to see the full breadth of data that's been collected?
I would think they should be able to.
Should parents know where that data could be sent and where it has been sent?
And again, I think parents should be able to know that.
Should parents have the right to correct something in the record that is wrong? And to what extent should parents be able to opt out of this data collection effort? Or should it be like a school trip? Your child is going to go on a school trip, you have to sign a permission slip. If instead of taking your child on a school trip, the government wants to collect data on the student, well, then maybe you should have to sign a permission slip for that.
Seem.
And that is something that other states have started having that conversation and have started proposing legislation. And
nothing has passed yet, though, correct? Because it's still so new.
Yeah, this is new. You have to realize, like, so this effort really took off in other states about a year ago. And you thinking, you know, we're starting with 2 moms, 3 moms, 4 moms, and now you have
it's not
these
an overnight process legislatively.
In a very quick period of time, this movement has become, in some cases, I think it's probably the dominant political movement within certain states.
I can honestly say that over the past few weeks, there has not been a day that I have not read an article from some major newspaper or whatever about Common Core. And I'll tell you, 6 months ago, it wasn't a subject that was on my lips.
Right.
I think I pay attention to things, you know.
By design. That it's a beautiful plan, or I shouldn't say it's not a beautiful, it's a brilliant plan through which the Common Core has been pushed onto the states. But what is beautiful is now, I think through this movement, citizens are regaining the sense that we need to have citizen-directed government. And that I think is a special type of liberty. It's a type of liberty that we've lost. Probably over the last 50 or 60 years, I think in America, there's been this sense that things are big. You know, you had the Soviet Union, you had, you had massive, you had the fascism. You know, those were efforts we had to fight. Then you had the huge multinational corporations sprouting up. You had massive advances in technology. You had all this sophistication and these big battles. And I think there was this sense that one person can't make a difference anymore. And things are just too big, they're too complicated. We really can't have citizen-directed government. You know, the Declaration, that was nice. The Constitution, that's nice too. These are very quaint things. But we need to kind of work around those documents. I think through this movement, though, we're realizing that no. One person can make a difference.
Absolutely.
It's proven, we've proven that now in state after state. One person can make a difference. And moreover, that is the best guard of good policy, to have citizens engaged. And we need to get back to that.
I totally agree with you. You know, one of the things that, and I'm hearing more about it as well, is the dollars involved. Now, in the town that I live in, we're basically told that, so far, we're told, that Common Core implementation is not going to be a budget buster because of the fact that we were already scheduled in the budget to buy new textbooks, and because we're considered one of the premier school systems in the state, that we don't have huge technology needs that maybe some other school systems might have. The state of New Hampshire, as far as I know, has thus far been unable to determine what the cost of implementation is going to be. Now, I know back a few weeks ago I had read that Education Week says that Common Core implementation will cost at least $289 per student nationwide. The Pioneer Institute and the American Principles Project estimate that Common Core is going to cost $16 billion. $16 billion. The Fordham Institute, which, as we know, supports Common Core, disputes that figure, and according to them, it's only going to cost us $8.3 billion only. But they didn't factor in the cost of servers or computers or any of the other technological infrastructure that's going to be needed to complete the assessments. So, I mean, here we have this huge, huge financial thing coming at us. Where's the money coming from? Is the federal government going to pay for this, or are we all going to be paying for it on the state and local levels?
The idea is that the states will have to pay for it. It'll be their ramped up technology that's going to be built out to accommodate the Common Core assessments. It'll be the states will have to pay for the additional computers and IT personnel that'll be needed to administer the test, and the states will have to pay for the higher costs of the tests.
And yet, in New Hampshire, we have no idea what it's going to cost.
Well,
New Hampshire Department of Education is not even taking a guess, and that's probably the case in a lot of states, I would guess.
Yes. I don't think there was one state, and certainly not the federal government, that did a comprehensive cost analysis prior to implementation. And again, this gets to cutting the legislators out of the process, cutting the people out of the process,
Unbelievable.
and to the big rush to get this implemented quickly. So it's a disaster, and maybe the federal government will try to come in and pay for it, but
well, that's our money too, though.
That's right. That's the citizens' money too, and of course, every time the federal government pays for something, it comes with more strings, and usually the federal government will pay for something, and you'll get a state will get a short-term monetary benefit in exchange for long-term strings attached that really end up costing the state more money down the road. So this is a disaster on any number of levels.
Well, I mean, it kind of seems to me like we're going to be spending billions of dollars on a program that extraordinarily learned people say has lousy standards, takes away a lot of privacy, takes away a lot of local control, puts the federal government more in charge of something, but yet we're all supposed to like it. Something's wrong with this picture.
Something's wrong with it, and I mean, beyond the federal government. So you look at education decision-making in New Hampshire prior to the Common Core. Now, for the most part, New Hampshire had the right to make decisions on education policy making internally. Now, with the Common Core, let's take changing a standard, or changing the design of one of the assessments. What's New Hampshire to do? New Hampshire and the other states are told, well, you'll have a seat at the table. Well, you used to own the table. You used to be able to make those decisions. A governor, a state senator, a state legislator, could go to its people and say, okay, look, we'll get this worked out. Come, let's have a hearing. Let's have a town hall. Let's decide this. Now you're told, well, you can have a seat at the table. And who else is at that table? Well, with the standards, it's another 40 states. So you had New Hampshire going from being able to make its decisions to it's going to have to sit down with the likes of New York and California.
And who's the host and dinner speaker? Bill Gates?
Well, here's another thing. So it's not just the states then too. You have the people who own the standards, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. You have the people who fund those entities. And then ultimately you have the federal government. So what kind of seat is this going to be? It's going to be a highly marginalized seat.
Got that right. Well, you know, believe it or not, we are closing in on the end of the show. And I mean, obviously this is a topic that we could talk about all afternoon. It's so huge, and I'm kind of hoping that you're going to swing through the state again and can get you back, because it just seems as though this is changing almost daily with all the dynamics that are going on nationwide.
I'll be back here. Look, I'll tell you what, you know, this is a wonderful opportunity for people to experience the liberty of citizen-directed government. It may be daunting at first to call up a state legislator or state senator and give him or her your opinion. But you do it once, you do it twice, and it is really a thrilling and empowering exercise.
Yes, it is.
It's walking in the steps of our founders. It's getting back to citizen-directed government. I don't know anyone who's done that, who's regretted it, and I don't know anyone who's done that who hasn't continued to do that. So I urge your viewers to get in touch with Cornerstone Action and to find out more about this. They can also find out more about it on the Truth in American Education network of website, which Cornerstone participates in. I think this is the dawn of a new day in America, one in which we get back to our founding and you know, reclaim that spirit, so much of which originated from New Hampshire in the first place.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, this was quite a show. And one of the things that I liked that Emmett said was that one person makes a difference. And, you know, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And being part of the solution to a great degree means being able to stand up and tell it like it is. And that's what we're about here. And I hope this show inspires you to tell it like it is, too. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll be back on this subject. Till next time, bye-bye.